Welcome back, my friends, to That's So Fringy podcast. You have made your way one more time to the coolest show on the internet, and we know that you're glad that you're here. We're glad that you're here, and we hope that you are just having a blast listening to all of these episodes. I know some of them are heavy. You know, we talk about all of these things, and as we're now in our series for all of these false flags, things get kind of heavy, but we wanted to start out by just saying, hey, welcome back. We love interacting with you guys, communicating with you guys, and we also want to let you know what we've got coming up in the future. So we have some really cool guests lined up. Let's see, we're going to be doing more false flags, but we have people coming on. There's a gentleman coming on by the name of Paul that's going to be talking about some clowns. Is that right? And that's a very interesting topic for me. I heard him on another podcast, and Kristen heard him on a different podcast, and we linked up and we were like, we got to get this guy on to talk about clowns because he just connects so many dots. And so stay tuned for that one. That one's going to be fun. Also coming up, we've got a mashup. That's right, you heard me. A Q&A mashup. And this is for anybody that maybe goes to church pretty regularly, or maybe they've gone to church in the past, or maybe they don't go to church, but they have these burning questions about the Bible, about Christianity. But maybe you don't feel like you can ask those questions or those things in your congregation. Maybe there's nobody around that you feel connected with or close enough to where you can ask those questions. Well, this mashup show is going to be just for that. So we're welcoming all questions. It's going to be myself. It's going to be Rod from Millennial Mustard Seed. He's going to be there. We're going to have Michael from the Fringe Radio Network, and that's actually where this is going to be broadcasting, is on the Fringe Radio Network. We are going to be live at that time, so you can get a hold of us at that time. If you follow Michael, you can go to fringeradionetwork.com and you'll find all of the links and everything to his show. He has, he's got a lot of shows. Space Force. He's got, Space Force, Spirit Force, Spirit Wars, and he has one with his wife called Strange O'Clock. So that's a good one. And if you are a fan of that show, Michael's going to be there. Also, the Days of Noah podcast, Pete from the Days of Noah podcast is going to come on as well. So the four of us are going to be hooking up together next Saturday, which will be the 11th. And it's going to be 11 o'clock Eastern time. So this week, what we're asking from you from this Sunday until next Saturday is ask questions that you might have. You can do it on Instagram. You could email us. If you have access to the internet, which hopefully you do, you can go and get on our website. Not very many people go to our website, but that's okay with us. It's just a landing page for those that are maybe still kind of old school and stuff like that. People like websites. Most of the podcast stuff that we do interactive wise is on Telegram and on Instagram. So if you want to send an email, we'll definitely write you back. It just might take a little bit longer. So all of that said to say, ask your questions. We hope that you're excited about what's coming in the future. But for today, drum roll, please. Ba, 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 ba. What do we got coming up for today? Do we want to continue in our 9/11 series?
Yes, we have part 2 of our false flag series, the 9/11 attacks. So we'll go through a little bit more of the stuff we have. We're not going to recap what we did last week in part 1. Mm-hmm. Just listen to it if you want. But we kind of spelled out the main narrative of what the news was trying to have us believe. And then we started with a few discrepancies, but now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes.
The nitty gritty, as they say.
And we're in our Oregon gear because we just beat Cal.
Mighty Oregon.
And it was a fun game to watch.
Sorry for any of you out there that are fans of
the California
Cal Bears, but we had to take them down. We had to do what the Ducks do, and we don't apologize for this.
No.
We don't.
What else?
Won't.
What else is new?
Let's see.
Is
getting
close to popping.
More and more pregnant.
We have a
by
few
the
weeks
day.
left. We have a few weeks left, but
Yeah.
we're on call. for go time.
Mm-hmm.
What we want to know is can we go live from the delivery room?
From the, from the midwifery. Oh my God.
I don't know if anybody wants to see that.
I'll just do a play-by-play, like I'm an announcer. I'll just be like, right now,
Rick will be outside the door.
Stirrups, floating around in the pool. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Well, we can't wait for Malachi to come. He's going to be the sweetest baby. We know that hopefully all of you out there in Fringy land are praying for Bethany and praying for Malachi and everything to be as it should be, God's way. You know, it's going to go smoothly, and we believe that in Jesus' name. So with that, we're going to get into the episode. That's an update for what we've got going on. Let's get into it. Kristen, I think we stopped with NORAD. Is that correct?
Yes, we did. Okay. So in part 1, we ended with some discrepancies to the narrative. And one of those discrepancies involves NORAD. So for those of you that don't know what NORAD is, it is North American Aerospace Defense Command. So their job is to essentially intercept rogue flights or flights that are off course or whatever. They're kind of the protectors of the aerospace. So that's what they literally sit there all day long and make sure the flights are staying on their flight path. And if they're not, they're intercepting them with aircraft, or they're talking to them like, hey, what's going on? I mean, that's their job.
They also protect Antarctica, but that's a different story, different topic.
So just to give you a little perspective, in the 9 months between September 2000 and June 2001, so in that 9-month period, NORAD intercepted 67 routine interceptions that were planes that were off course. So, and I mean, I would say in a year we have had maybe 100 around that time, a little bit less, but that's quite a bit of planes that are going rogue for whatever reason. So they have part of their training is they make these mock scenarios of things that could happen. And, you know, it's like training for any other job. You sit there and they go, oh, this plane is, you know, da, 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 da. So they had a mock scenario that surprisingly was, what would we do if airplanes ran into the World Trade Centers? So just oddly specific, but that was one of their
so random.
Their mock trials. So on 9/11, the 4 planes that were off course, they were off course for over an hour with no interception, no contact from NORAD, no nothing. These planes were just off. 4 of them were off course for that long.
Well, and that would just lead into the confusion of the matter, right? I mean, if you have a military drill, which I've been a part of hundreds of, they're very organized. They have a lot of objectives, checkpoints, things that you need to get done. They're watching you for certain maneuvers and certain, you know, things that you're doing right. And so if they start calling on the radio, like, you're confused. You don't know, like, is this real? Is this a drill? Is this not a drill? Which is why they usually say over the radio when you're getting like an emergency broadcast or something like that, this is not a drill. And they started hearing these, this is not a drill messages. And they were like, how is it that the exact same scenario just actually happened?
Right. So to give some perspective, Flight 11, which was the Boston to California flight, it was the first plane to hit. Over half of its flight, it was going in the wrong direction.
And nobody said anything.
Not just like a couple of degrees off course or something. It was going in the wrong direction for over half.
So so they're in a military drill while the attacks are actually happening.
Okay, so yes, there is. So one of the things that happened shockingly on that morning of 9/11 is that they were in a mock drill. They were having, what did they call it? War games.
Literally that morning.
So everybody at NORAD apparently was doing this mock drill. And so the reason that according to them, the reason that they didn't do anything for an hour was they thought that it was part of the drill.
Yeah.
So who thinks it's a coincidence that they had this drill going on that same morning as these attacks were actually happening?
I mean, some of you may have heard the saying, how many coincidences before it becomes mathematically impossible. I mean, I think it was, I'm not sure where I read that, but for those of you that have read that, you know that this is a very, statistically, this will not happen unless it is an inside job. That's
right. So like somebody had to know that this was going on at that exact time. So another discrepancy with NORAD is that there was a lady from the ground crew that she said she called in shortly after 8 a.m. that the plane had been hijacked. And she swears up and down that she called it into NORAD and then they did nothing. So, and their defense is, we didn't think it was real. So.
Which would be a valid excuse if you are compartmentalized, right? If you are in a compartmentalization, because a lot of people might be thinking right now, like, how would it be that they were able to pull this off and these guys weren't even paying attention because they were confused? Well, if it's completely compartmentalized, like we've already talked about hundreds of times, how the secret government likes to work, the black ops especially, they will compartmentalize everything. So everybody that is even part of it, whether they know it or not, they're part of the setup, they're part of the drill, and they get bamboozled because they think that it's real based on their training and everything like that, but they're not doing anything because they're waiting for orders to get something done. And when you compartmentalize people, that confusion leads to success because they don't have any orders. And that's how the military works. Here's another
coincidence. So these NORAD did nothing about these planes for this whole time, even though they were going in the wrong direction. They were very, very clearly off course. They were headed for California. So they were nowhere near where they were supposed to be. But after the first plane hit the first Trade Center, it only took them 30 seconds to call it in as the real thing, not a simulation. So 30 seconds after the plane actually hit, then that was when they were all alerted that this was actually happening in the real world.
Which is too late.
That quickly.
It's too late.
I don't remember hearing anything about NORAD or none of this was ever talked about, I don't think, in the mainstream news media.
Not in the news at all. I mean, at the very beginning, there were some things that were reported, like explosions, as we talked about last week, the explosions and the rate of explosions and all of the things that the eyewitness testimony saw on the ground, that the discrepancies between, but nobody was talking about NORAD being on this. I
didn't even know that was a thing. I knew that there was, obviously some kind of patrolling of the skies. If I even really thought about it back then, because we were young. I mean, we were 19, so I probably wasn't really thinking that much about it. But I mean, I remember thinking there's got to be somebody that's policing the airways, but we didn't hear anything about NORAD that I remember on the news or on the radio or anything.
Yeah. Well, and that's what the Air Force is supposed to be doing, right? They scramble in the event of something like this. They take care of the skies. However, if you're having an event that morning, a training simulation, nobody's going to be ready. It's kind of like I used to do active shooter drills and used to do clearing houses and stuff like that. And if you're going live for that, it's very dangerous because you might cross muzzles and stuff like that. So you would use simunition rounds, which is basically like a soapy round that just leaves a mark. And so when you would do those, nobody was prepared to actually fight a war, to actually do real live events, because we were all simulating. We were in the middle of a simulation. So we would have had to go get our real guns or take off the, top piece to our simulation piece and put on our real upper and put real bullets in. But those bullets are stored away somewhere else because we don't want to have any negligent discharges or any issues. And so you just could imagine in the middle, if they were to say, we're being invaded right now, our base is being invaded, you have to stop everything that you're doing. It would take a minute to get your head wrapped around that, and then to start switching gears. Now you gotta scramble jets. Well, how many jets do we have available? Turns out they didn't have very many. Because they were all doing these drills. So they were all flying out in different areas, doing different drills, occupied in other areas. So even if you wanted to scramble a jet, you couldn't. There wasn't time. It was already done.
I mean, you would think though, like if we're doing a drill on this, I'm assuming it was planned. We're going to do a drill September 11th at whatever time. They would at least have a few people who were actually watching the airway. Like,
well, I think that they
in the
did,
drill, but we have 3 people who are
My understanding was that it was more like the East Coast was doing this drill. It was a semi-annual drill, so they did it a couple of times a year. So I think the West Coast was doing it, or the East Coast was doing it, and the West Coast wasn't, which was awfully convenient, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's people that actually have the manual from that day. That was what we were doing during this mission, and it had on the front cover the Twin Towers being hit by planes. Like that's how
that was the war game they were playing. And it's interesting that they call it a war. That's what they call those simulations were war games.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting.
I find it interesting.
The play on words.
Well, it makes me think
anything else you have about NORAD?
No, because I don't want to get into Antarctica. But the fact that they basically cover NORAD, so North America is what they're supposed to be taking over. But they really patrol the upper continents, so they're kind of in charge of the upper continents, America and Canada and stuff like that. So they're patrolling those borders and everything like that all the way down into South America, because then that becomes the Southern Hemisphere on a globe. But the Southern Hemisphere then should have a Southern Command, which is a whole different command. Then you have a Pacific Fleet, like in the Navy, you have a Pacific Fleet and you have an Atlantic Fleet. So when you're taking out NORAD, you're not really taking out the whole of America. They still have these things, but as far as...
And this was a pretty localized area. Like, it was not like these planes were spread out that far. They were between DC and West Virginia or where,
So it's not like Pearl Harbor was, as they kept saying, like this is just like Pearl Harbor. It's not like Pearl Harbor was being attacked and then they were doing their simulations over on the East Coast, and that just is super weirdly coincidental. No, we're talking about the same quadrant of the nation that we were having attacks in was the same one, the same area of operation that was in the training area. So it's so mathematically impossible that it's not an inside job at that. I mean, once you start putting those pieces together, it's done.
Yeah. Where is NORAD? Like, where are they headquartered at? Do you know? Or them? I mean, obviously they have more than one, but where would the place that was in charge of that? Do you know where it's at?
It's somewhere in my brain. I want to say Colorado, but I think that might be wrong. I think it's
I know it doesn't really matter, but I was just curious. Yeah. Okay, so those are the main discrepancies that happened with NORAD. It was just a complete... I mean, if you're at a job and something goes terribly wrong, they're going to trace it back, and it's going to be somebody's fault, and there's going to be, a punishment of some kind. There's a demotion. There's a something, like somebody dropped the ball here. And here we're talking about somebody dropped a lot of balls to let all 4 of these planes go off course. Stop it. To go off course for that long and nothing to happen to them when we know that they were routinely intercepting planes.
Yeah.
So they were able to scramble jets super quickly and get out there if somebody was off course, and somehow magically they just didn't know that it was real. I mean, I think of it from the perspective of those people that were working. Like, how guilty would you feel? Because when you're in a simulation, sometimes you're joking around and you're like, oh, yeah, it's going to hit the World Trade Center. The guilt that those people would have felt, like knowing that it was actually happening, like that, I would feel so bad, when you do something or you should have prevented something in your job and you didn't, and you feel terrible. This is like such a huge, I don't know. I imagine the guilt that those people felt was
That part of it is diabolical if you think about it. Like, I mean, the whole thing of it. I mean, if we're recapping, they basically set charges in all of these buildings and then they imploded them on purpose after they pretend hijacked the plane, after they pretend slammed it into the side of the building and then killed all those 3,000 people, plus all of those firefighters running in to save them, plus all the people that are jumping off the building, all of those things that we're seeing on TV, the fear over and over again. And then to be on the team, as you said, that just wasn't available. We just weren't available. There's so many things that add up to how evil this whole thing is, especially when we get to the end. But I don't want to go too far ahead of myself. So what do we got next?
Okay. So next we're going to go over a little bit of the Pentagon, because there was some very strange things at the Pentagon. So unlike the Twin Towers, there's no clear footage of the Pentagon somehow. Nobody got a video, supposedly. It's supposedly they collected all of the surveillance footage that gas stations, all these places around there.
The Pentagon.
The Pentagon has to have so many cameras going there. I mean,
I think they have one shot of it from like a guard shack or something.
So
like
they
that.
have all those. But that was the FBI that got there so quickly. I think we talked about that in the last one, how fast they had control of the scene. So the FBI goes around, collects all the CCTV from the places around there, and somehow, drumroll, all of this footage got misplaced. They can't find it.
What a tricky incident.
Yeah. So there's one shot like from I think that they said that the camera was on a light pole that was next to a guard station or something, and that's the only footage that we have. And it's really crazy, but I don't see a plane in the footage. You can find it, and they did just release a new clip of it or whatever. It's kind of like a simulation of what it would look like if the plane were flying. And then at the moment of impact, there's no plane there, which is super weird. So if Freedom of Information Act was submitted to get the footage from that day, and it was denied because the footage was missing. They can't find it.
Interesting. Yeah. I didn't know they could deny those.
So then everyone who saw the incoming flight, including the Dallas airport flight controllers, thought the plane was a military fighter jet. So all these people, they saw the plane and they saw a military jet, and they thought in their minds, because they knew what was happening in New York, they thought in their minds, yes, we finally got one of our guys in the air to take care of this stuff. People had hope at that point, so much so they thought that was one of our planes, which is really weird because obviously one of our planes didn't hit the Pentagon, and they specifically thought it was a fighter jet. The people that obviously these people that are in the air traffic control, they know the difference between a military plane and a commercial jet. So they were calling it one of our fighter jets. So you tell me if you think that these people would know the difference between these two types of planes. So the one thing a fighter jet, well, not the one thing, but the big thing that a fighter jet has as opposed to a commercial jet is they have bing, bing, bing missiles. So if you look at what a missile looks like when it hits the side of a building and the kind of destruction that's there, and then look at the footage that you can of the Pentagon and the aftermath, and I don't see how anybody can actually think that a plane did that. There was no plane parts found at the scene.
Shrapnel.
There was no shrapnel. There was, like we talked about before in the Shanksville part, there was if this was a passenger jet and it was able to make this corkscrew maneuver, hit the Pentagon at almost exactly ground level without hitting anything else. Doesn't knock down trees, doesn't knock down power poles. I think it hit one light pole. And then it hits the side of the Pentagon, and there's not a piece of luggage. There's not a piece of clothing. Is
there a passport?
I think there was. They should have just built the Pentagon out of passports.
Yeah, that thing would have bounced right. That Scud missile would have bounced right off.
I know. So there, and I mean, not to be morbid, but there's not an arm or a leg or there's nothing.
Right.
There's nothing in this footage. What it made me think of is, oddly, this is how my brain works. We watched a documentary, babe, you remember, about Leonard Skinner. And it was like the people that were on the flight when it crashed and all, and it was detailing it, and they were like recounting it, and the amount of shrapnel from just that small Cessna plane that was all over the place. All of the shrapnel and the clothing and the luggage and all that stuff was spread out for like 2 miles. There was just stuff everywhere. Imagine. And there was bodies, there was people, there was blood, there was all kinds of stuff. It was a very gruesome scene. And then you look at what happened at the Pentagon, and it doesn't look like that. If it was a plane that hit the Pentagon, think of it as a circle for the fuselage, and then you have 2 giant wings with the engines that would knock like more of a kind of a parallel to the ground around that fuselage. There was none of that. There was one small hole, and if you measure it top to bottom, the plane wouldn't even fit in there.
It's just
we're supposed to believe that the plane like disintegrated,
right? So
vaporized.
Supposedly, it like vapor. But I've seen lots of plane crashes.
This is getting weirder,
and that doesn't happen. These engines are like made out of titanium.
Well, anybody that paid attention to JFK Jr.'s plane crash, I mean, that was a huge deal. It was all over the news, and he crashed in the ocean, and they were able to recover most of his plane from the ocean, and so if you impact water the way that he did, there's not going to be much left of that plane, and it's going to be, scattered all over the place. Hitting water that quickly is almost like hitting a building straight on.
For
and
sure.
There still should be remnants of that aircraft, especially if it was a big old aircraft. And there just isn't any. And the time frame that we talked about last week on how quickly, 6 months that they got that thing back up and running, they got everybody moved back in, and you're just like,
well, oddly, that part of the Pentagon had just had renovations done. And it was the only part of the Pentagon that was basically rated to handle a specifically airplane crash.
Stop it.
No.
Was the same construction company working on it?
I didn't even look at that. I wonder if it's old George Bush's old friend, old buddy, old pal.
It's crazy. So, and the guy that's flying the plane, I remember you telling me when you were researching that this guy, went to, the attacker that they say was the guy that took over the plane and flew it into the Pentagon. They say that he was literally the worst pilot out of all of them. Like he couldn't maintain control of a Cessna, which is a very small passenger plane. But somehow he had control of the 747. A lot of those other people that were, pilots with them, or even other actual current day airplane pilots, they're like, that maneuver is very difficult to be able to corkscrew a giant plane like that and to come through and to hit it at ground level like that. That's a very high level experienced maneuver, and there's no way. Most of them said there's no way we could do it, let alone this guy that is the bottom of his class and could barely fly a Cessna. So the whole narrative is just really wonky when you start putting all of the pieces together, like we talked about up until this point, but especially like no plane, but there's a passport, and the guy was last in his class, but he did this crazy maneuver, but then there's no plane parts, but then there was a, F-16 in the area that had missiles.
Yeah.
And you start to think
gets me big time.
I think the missile actually makes more sense than a plane, because the missile would explode and you wouldn't find much of it, and it would put about the same size hole in the side of that building. So, I mean, I don't think it's too far.
There was no, what do they call it? There was no outline of the wings coming in. It was just a circle in the side of the building. And the wings, if let's say that they hit this side of the Pentagon and it was so strong because it was reinforced with passports that the wings fell off and didn't make a dent, you would still find the wings on the lawn. Like the wings would be in the parking lot, or there was none of that.
Yeah.
They said that everything from the plane went into the building and melted itself, but the building itself didn't
There's
melt all
that
the
jet
way.
fuel again.
It was reinforced.
That dang jet fuel. It's the same
wild.
jet fuel that they use in the other planes, the other jets that have crashed in the past. But for whatever reason, at this point in time, it's the hottest burning thermite jet fuel that you've ever seen. And it just doesn't make any sense. It makes you start hopefully asking these questions. What is it that they're actually doing? And we have a lot of weird stuff going on in the news today with Israel, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. But it's important that you pay attention to Israel. Israel is not what they've told you it is. Israel is nowhere close to what they have told you it is. And I think we're going to find here in a little bit that they had a large part to play in this whole thing. So, moving on.
So, the area of the Pentagon that this plane, we'll call it a plane, supposedly hit is where all of the budget stuff was happening. So, remember, the Pentagon is where our military industrial complex stuff is located. So, you know, the budget part of specifically the Army was taking place in this part of the building. And what's odd is the day before, so on September 10th, 2001, there was $2.3 trillion that was reported missing from the Army budget. And they were working on that. So remember, this is before we had, you know, the cloud and we had all this data storage space that we have now where things are backed up and backed up and backed up. This was before all of that. So supposedly they were working on this budget discrepancy, a discrepancy of $2.3 trillion. They were working on it in this specific part of the building. And somehow all of those records got destroyed. So everything that they were researching, looking into to try to find this, all of that was gone. Bye-bye. Jet fuel. It's the jet fuel.
It seems very convenient.
Yeah.
Yeah, Donald Rumsfeld got on the news on national TV and announced it, but then the next day 9/11 happened and everybody forgot all about it. I mean, if you tell most people in America today, well, maybe better now that we have the internet and everybody's kind of waking up, but if you would have told them back then, you know, even a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, that the Pentagon had lost $2.3 trillion the day before 9/11, they would have told you, I never heard that. That doesn't even make any sense. I never heard that in the news, but it was. I had
no idea. And what was really weird is most of the time, if you're hip to the way they do things, they give you really bad or like weird news like this on a Friday. They don't do it on a Monday because then everybody has all week. All these people have all week to, you know, stew on it, to tear everything apart, blah, blah, blah. So they usually do this stuff at the end of the week. Mm-hmm. So they announced this on a Monday, which was weird that they announced it when they did. And then boom, 9/11 happens the next day.
Yeah.
And then is it ever talked about again? I mean,
no,
I don't think so.
We're going to let that go because we're going to go to war now.
Right.
That's what it turned into.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were already banging the war drums. We were already talking about bin Laden. We were already moving on. Nobody wanted to talk about that because we had to now get ready for this new war on terror, you know, they were saying over and over.
They did
again.
End up, so the Army did publish or did come out and say, because of the attacks on 9/11, that they did not file their 2001 budget because of the loss of records and the loss of life on 9/11. So they just didn't have to publish that year's budget, which happened to be the year that $2.3 trillion was gone.
It's pretty much what it should be because we've never seen that
probably
much
was
money.
trillion
We have
million.
no idea what that even looks like. I mean, it's insane. And not to mention the other shady stuff that's going on behind the scenes, which we'll talk about later. But keep in mind that a large amount of money going missing at the time that it went missing is very interesting.
And the fact that they used the tragedy, the loss of records specifically, and the loss of life, they had to add that in there for the reason that they didn't publish their 2001 budget. So,
did they say how many people died in the the Pentagon
I have
attack?
that somewhere. I think it's on my notes.
I'm not sure in the Pentagon. I know it was an overall of about 3,000 people.
It was
total.
a couple few hundred that were in that part of the building, because remember had been doing renovations on it, so a lot of the employees that normally work in that part of the building were relocated and in a different area.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I think essentially the only people that were in that part of the building that day were the people that were working on this budget discrepancy.
That would have the knowledge that this money was missing and maybe even why. So they got to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I'm starting to sound like a conspiracy
we're definitely
theorist.
onto something. I know, you sound like a conspiracy. So what else? The hole in the building. We kind of talked about that, but so another thing is when you look at the footage of the World Trade Center and there is what did they call it? A wing outline. That's what I was looking for earlier. There's wing outlines from the planes that hit the towers, and there is no wing outline on the Pentagon at all. And at one point there was a photo of like a helicopter that was kind of hovering near, taking pictures and probably taking video and that kind of stuff. I don't know where that footage went, but there is a picture of this helicopter, and even the helicopter wouldn't have fit in the hole that was on the side of the building. And a 747 is obviously much bigger than a helicopter. So strange.
Yeah, there's lots of different theories online about the planes, whether they were real, whether they weren't real. A lot of people think that maybe it was Project Bluebeam, where they projected them into the sky with that technology, and everybody seeing it saw planes, but it was the explosion. The planned demolition was the goal. It was a thermite explosion up there instead of a plane. And so as you look at it, a lot of people have studied it and tried to see if it was CGI as it was going through there, or Project Bluebeam. Some people speculate that it is, and I'm not going to take a stand on it because I don't know. For sure. I wasn't there, but I do want to give all of the information.
Yeah.
So some people speculate that there were no planes on 9/11, zero. Then that all of it was either Project Bluebeam or missiles or whatever else.
Somebody went out and a gentleman, I can't remember his name, but he went out and did all these measurements, and he said that the hole in the side of the Pentagon was the exact same size hole that a cruise missile would make.
Interesting.
I would be curious to know how many people on the ground on 9/11. Obviously, that's a busy area all the time. Saw an actual plane fly into the building, because we're seeing what's on TV, which can be edited. CGI.
Who knows what they've done to it? I tend to think that the people that they were planes that hit the Twin Towers, because there are a lot of reports of actual planes hitting. I don't think there was one taxi driver that they couldn't find again or something. He was the only one that they had on video that said that it was a plane, and it could have meant that he saw a plane, because people did see a plane, but then their brains maybe didn't process, or they weren't staring at it long enough to see that it was a missile that came out. They see a plane and then they see an explosion, and they think that it was a plane that hit the Pentagon. But I don't think that I think there was only one eyewitness testimony of it being a plane that hit the building.
Well, and if they're immediately being told
exactly
a plane has hit the Pentagon or the Twin Towers or whatever, the brain works really weirdly. And so that's what gets locked into your brain, and that's what it is, no matter what. I mean, trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just weird.
I mean, I'm not saying that there weren't planes at all. What I'm saying is they do have technology that can project things into the sky. And that's very important to know, because you can be fooled by things that are in the sky. I mean, it's possible for them to do that. So we have to be clear in helping people understand that we're not saying that there weren't any planes. What we're saying is it's very interesting what some people have found in some of the videos that they're found, slow motion and stuff like that. Just look it up if you are more interested in that rabbit hole, something to look into. So
yeah. So the next thing we have, which Rick will be of much help on this one, is another thing that nobody really talks about that day was Building 7.
Building 7.
We had Tower 1, Tower 2, but most people don't realize there was actually there's 7 buildings that are part of that complex. The World Trade Center complex is not just the 2 towers.
Yeah.
So it was 3 buildings that actually fell down.
Yeah.
But only 2 planes.
Yeah. So Tower 7 was kind of a weird one because there was a fire that started in Tower 7 earlier in the day. And everybody was kind of speculating that it was because it was hit with debris from the other falling debris from the other towers.
It was dang jet fuel.
Yeah, it was about as far away from the main towers, Tower 1 and 2, as you can get on the complex. It was actually pretty far away. And thus, fires started going on 1 or 2 floors for most of the day. The weird thing about it is when you saw it come down, it came down in the same way that the towers did, which was more of a controlled demolition where it falls into its own footprint. And we talked about that at length on the last episode where, how you can do a controlled demolition and how that's really the only way that it would fall into its own footprint like that. It's just
because Building 7 and Tower 1 and 2, all 3 of them fell into their own footprint. Yeah. So Building 3, which was a Marriott hotel so the whole area was like a 16-acre, plot of land. So Building 3 was a Marriott hotel, and it was actually kind of more like cut in half by debris, like more like what you would think something fell and kind of cut part of the building off, and it, fell like if you cut cake and it falls sideways. Like that's kind of more how that part fell. But Building 7 specifically fell again into its own footprint.
Yeah, and there wasn't any noticeable outside damage to the building, like you were just stating. If something would have hit the outside of the building, you would have seen some exterior damage, but you don't really see any exterior damage. What you see is fires going on probably a couple floors, and you can see that through the windows, how the windows have been burned out a little bit and everything like that. The interesting thing is that people were talking about how Building 7 was going to come down way early in the day. Like,
that was my favorite.
Hours before it actually came down. They were reporting it on the news.
Did you guys see the clip of the lady? She's in the UK, and she's standing there, and she's basically reporting, Building 7 is come down, it's collapsed, and Building 7 is in the shot, in the frame behind her, and it's still standing. She doesn't know it because she's not looking at the live picture behind her, but she's just reporting what she's looking at on her paper, which came from the CIA.
And that was on BBC.
And that was on, huge BBC. Yeah. And it was minutes before.
Yeah, so the tower hadn't even come down yet. They're already reporting it. A lot of people on the ground said that people, were telling them, like the firefighters and the police officers and those type of things, construction workers that were in the area, they were being told by their superiors that Tower 7 was coming down around 5-something o'clock, which is weird because that's like exactly when it came down. They knew exactly the time. And when they were asked, those people on the scene, when they were asked how they knew it was coming down, all they said was, we heard it from above. We heard it from above. And then when they were asked, those supervisors, when they were asked where they heard it from, they said it was some random engineer that was walking around.
Right. There's 2 random engineers.
These random engineers that were on site that day, they just kind of showed up and they were walking around telling these people, these supervisors, that Tower 7 was coming down very specifically at a very specific time. And it did. And not only did it, but it fell, as we already stated, within its own footprint. So,
just to clarify, Building 7 was not a tiny building. Like, it was, it was 42 stories, and it was another steel frame building. So there's no reason. And they said the same thing. The jet fuel from the explosions above caused the debris to fall, caused it to catch on fire, and it somehow burned hot enough to melt the steel beams in this building.
Yeah.
But how do they explain the jet fuel wasn't in this building? That's what I don't understand. Is how did it get? If they're using the excuse that it was the jet fuel that got hot enough to bring the towers down, what was hot enough in this building to bring it down? It doesn't make any sense.
Because they were far apart.
Because it was the furthest building from the towers.
Yeah.
And these other buildings in between, the Marriott, there was a St. Nicholas's Greek Orthodox Church, and that building was crushed, is all it said.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was, let's see, there's a couple other buildings.
Is there footage of the? I know there's footage of Tower 7, but of like the Marriott and all the other buildings,
not much
coming down, because we saw that video of the Twin Towers over and over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Which part of me is like, how did they even get that video? Because
I know
they didn't know that it was going to happen, right?
Who happened to be filming the towers at that exact? Because they have like a rudimentary cell phone video from the ground. Surveillance cameras, maybe I could see like if it happened to be pointing in that direction, but some of these are people that were specifically filming it, which seemed weird.
It just all seems weird.
So then there is buildings 1, 2, and 7 collapsed into their own footprint. Buildings 4, 5, and 6, the only thing that it said is that they were damaged beyond repair, so they were demolished. And they were demolished pretty quickly.
Yeah. Do we know who was occupying Building 7? Like, what did they do in Building 7? Do we know?
So, let's see. I know I have it in here somewhere.
So basically, if you're going to take down another building, right, there's got to be an agenda. If you're taking, if it is a planned event, which we're making a very good case for, I would say, then what is the motive of taking out the Pentagon? I feel like we've already pretty plainly laid that out. But also, what is the motive for Building 7? Mm-hmm. And so then you have to figure out why are we doing this? What's the why behind it? And I think it's because of who's occupying the building.
Let's go ahead and read it. The tenants of Building 7. So they were mostly banks, insurance, investment people, that kind of thing. The largest tenant was the Solomon Brothers. The other people that were in the building were Secret Service had an office, the IRS, the INS, the DOD, the CIA, and the SEC.
Stop. What?
All of those people had office space in Building 7.
That's real life, folks.
Nobody knew that there was a seat. Like nobody, not even the people that were working in Building 7 knew that the CIA had an office in there.
The CIA has offices everywhere, you guys.
Yeah.
But
if you're doing a cover up of money, right, a large portion of money that is missing, you have banks that are there. And a lot of people on the internet are speculating that in the basement down there is where they were housing a lot of gold. A lot of gold for a very specific reason that we'll not get into today. But there was a lot of gold, and that may, if we're keeping score, may have been the $2.3 million that went missing, and then all of that, or trillion. It's a lot of money. We don't know. But it went missing, possibly from there, right before, and then all of the evidence was covered up. All of the CIA, DOD, FBI, all of that evidence for all of their nefarious
knew that
details.
All of those people had a building had an office in the same building. That seems odd, but there was another. Weird. So the SEC was doing a massive investigation on Wall Street. Mm-hmm. So their office and records were all destroyed. They were also investigating Enron. I don't know if you guys remember that Enron scandal that happened. Mm-hmm. We're not going to get into that because it's a big, huge thing. Maybe another episode, but yeah. So the Enron scandal was made public. So it was announced to the public in October of 2001. Yeah. So you can believe that they were like knee deep in investigations in September. They announced it to the public in October. Oh yeah. They had enough evidence to be able to, actually announce it and move forward with it. So all of that stuff got destroyed in this Building 7. And then I found
the plot thickens.
The BBC reported that Building 7 collapsed at 4:54 p.m., but the building didn't actually collapse or fall until 5:20 p.m.
5:20, almost exactly how the engineer said it was going to come down.
Yeah, it was super weird. And then CNN reported at 4:15. So again, it didn't collapse until 5:20, but CNN reported at 4:15 that Building 7 was in severe danger of collapsing. They somehow knew.
Oh,
I mean, they're talking about it for hours.
Yeah.
Talking about it for hours before it even comes down. And it is just a joke. It's just a joke.
Yes.
And for those of us that aren't paying attention, that still have our head in the sand talking about how 9/11 was, the greatest atrocity from the Muslim world to us that could ever have happened. And then we have to go in this war on terror. The biggest country that benefits from us going to war with all of those Arab nations is Israel. And when you start thinking about all the things that are going on in our world now with Israel, and maybe if you've been on Telegram, and if you're not, you should get on there and get on our Fringy chat, because I'm sending stuff on there all the time. I just posted a video of Benjamin Netanyahu talking about 9/11 right after it happened, basically as if he was outraged by how these Muslim countries could have done such a thing. We've been telling you how evil these Muslims are. And what do? We fall for it hook, line, and sinker, right? So the Israeli Mossad is a large part of what happened with 9/11. It was orchestrated with a combined effort with Israel and America to get this 20-year plus war started so that they could take out all of the people in that region, and Israel can expand, because that's Israel's dream, is to take over that land. And they've been fighting over that land forever, as we know.
And we, as Americans, as an American military, eliminated a lot of their competition in that war that somehow lasted 20 years and lasted far more countries than Afghanistan, which is where they started. And
to go back to what we talked about on the last episode, there were those 5 Israeli men that were up on top of that building that the woman saw when she was looking through her binoculars. They were in a unmarked white van in an upper parking garage, watching everything go on and celebrating as 9/11 was going on. Then they got into their van, went to the airport, and left, and went back to Israel, and they were never heard from again. So there's this huge Israeli component that we need to start paying attention to, and start talking about things like the Khazarian mafia, and how the Jews aren't really
Nazi Jews,
the Jews that you think that they are, the Jews of the Bible. It's a very interesting topic that we don't really have the time to get into, but you need to understand that everything that's going on now in the world is retribution for what happened on 9/11, because this was Israel and our own government attacking us, the American citizens,
so that we would then attack their enemy.
Yes. And they could steal our money.
Yep.
And they could, money laundering and all of those things that they do, which we've learned, recently, as all of the stuff with Joe Biden's and his son Hunter's dealings overseas, and how they're trying to send money to Ukraine to launder that money, and how it has, been proven that it came back to the United States, to the Democratic Party. All of those things have been proven, and this is all retribution for what they did to us in 9/11. This is why they're saving Israel for last. And Israel is the enemy of God. And that's hard for us to believe, because those of us that read the Bible, we see Israel as a nation that we should be paying attention to, God's portion, God's one that was set apart. But if you really read the Bible, you'll find that Israel has turned their back on God over and over and over again. And then when and I'm going to preach, here it comes. And then when he sent his son to die on a cross for each and every one of us, they killed him. The Jews killed him. And the Jews didn't believe him. And they didn't want to follow after him. And so what have they been doing ever since, trying to get on the good side of God, the good Jews and the bad Jews, trying to destroy everything that God has made good. And so we have to pay attention that just because somebody says that they're a Jew doesn't mean they're a Jew. There's a lot of people out there that are saying that they're women, and we know that they're not. So it's possible that somebody is saying that they're something, but they're not actually that thing. Okay, so we can't have the wool pulled over our eyes as Christians thinking that just because we're Americans, we have to support Israel. Just because we love God, we have to support Israel. Look at the facts. Look at the evidence. Who killed Jesus? And who to this day is still trying to kill, murder, control the entire world? How many of our sitting governors and senators have dual citizenship in Israel? Look it up. It's pretty interesting. Why is our nation so obsessed with Israel, and why will we always support Israel in everything? Well, those days have changed because of some issues that they're having right now, but I digress.
Okay. So after Building 7 comes down, they sent out a poll or a research project. So 3,000 architects signed a statement that said this steel frame building absolutely cannot collapse the way that they said it happened. We're not talking a couple of people. So there was a couple of engineers that happened to be walking around saying this building is going to collapse. This is 3,000 architects that are big, structural architects that looked at everything that happened in Building 7, and they said this can't have happened the way that they said that it happened. There's just no way. Another really suspect thing was the owner of the building. There's a video, which is really hard to find. I think it's in one of those documentaries that we linked on our last thing. But there's a recording of the owner saying, and I quote, "Pull it," which if you don't really know, like I could have watched that video and not known what they were talking about. But the term "pull it" is essentially what they say when they're ready to set off that daisy chain of charges in a controlled demolition. So that's the terminology that is used in the industry. Pull it is basically like when you see the cartoons and they push down the TNT thing and everything blows up. That's the command that they give. And so somebody, I think it was one of the reporters, said, "Pull it," like that. But that's what they say when they're doing a controlled demolition. That doesn't make any sense. So then he puts out a statement that says they were saying pull it because they were going to clear the building of the firefighters due to structural compromise. So they came out and said pull it. They didn't deny that they said pull it. They said pull it because we were going to pull the firefighters out at that moment because we knew the building was structurally too damaged for them to continue firefighting.
Do they think we're dumb? Do we think
I think
they
so.
think that we don't understand grammar and how it works? They would say pull them. They wouldn't say pull it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Or they would say get them out of there.
They wouldn't say
get out, evacuate, get out.
Yeah. They would say get out. Let's go.
They would use the actual code
time's
words
up, let's go.
for getting out because they don't say pull it. They actually say certain code words that mean get out of the building now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then, as this documentary went on, there was actually 0 recorded cases of a steel-framed building falling into its own footprint from fire in the entire world. 0 in the entire world, which I thought was crazy.
Now there's been 1.
Right. Well, there's technically been 3 on the same day, which is super weird.
One of them was predicted at a certain time.
So in 1986, this Alexis Nikon Plaza, this is a building in Montreal that had a partial collapse of the 11th floor. The building itself did not collapse. There was a partial collapse on the 11th floor because they were like, oh yeah, there's been other buildings that have fallen from fire, whatever, collapsed into its own footprint. This was a partial collapse of 1 floor, and that the only floor that partially collapsed was the floor that was actually on fire.
Makes sense to me.
So then there's another one in 1970. This is the One New York building in New York City. And this one, the connection bolts sheared during a fire, causing several steel beams on the 33rd and 34th floor to collapse. But the building itself did not collapse. So even with the bolts failing and shearing themselves off, it was only a partial of the 33rd and 34th floor, and that's it.
Yeah, this has never happened before. The way that they say that it happened, it's never happened. So either they didn't do their homework or they're just this stupid. I think both. They're just stupid. And they think that we're stupid and we're just going to buy it. And we have for too long. And that's why we're doing this episode. That's why we're doing this series, is because we want people to wake up to the fact that we're not stupid. We actually
things couldn't have happened that way. And it's almost like, how many lies are they going to tell us before we stop and go, okay, they're lying? Like if they're willing to lie about some of this stuff, who's to say they're not willing to lie about all of this stuff?
Everything.
That's what I don't, it's like fool me once, shame on me, or shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Like it does. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. So another thing was in Building 7, there was the New York City Office of Emergency Management, which includes the mayor's bunker. So they have a mayor's bunker in Building 7 for in case there's a crazy event like this that happens. But coincidentally, Rudy Giuliani, who was the mayor, was not in the bunker. So when Building 7 collapsed, he wasn't in the bunker, which is where he was supposed to be. Because again, the building didn't collapse until 5:20 p.m. Yep. So that would have been plenty of time. Hey, Rudy, come on. We got to get in the bunker. Let's go. These planes hit the towers at 9:00 in the morning. Let's by noon, we're in the bunker, right? And this building doesn't fall until 5. He wasn't in the bunker.
He should be running that city from the bunker because
he has everything he needs to be the mayor and do his job from that bunker. But he was where I didn't even know where they said he was.
So either he had inside information. Or he had inside information. I mean, that's just how it goes. He would have been in the bunker. I mean, why wouldn't he not be in the bunker? It's just that's protocol. So they didn't do protocol for whatever reason. And then that building happened to collapse. It's just another anomaly that makes
another weird thing. Right. So here's another weird thing. So eventually the 9/11 Commission report came out, which was supposed to be everything that happened on that day that people need to know about. Okay, it's supposed to be in this commission report.
The experts are speaking. You must listen.
Right, exactly. Guess how much they talked about Building 7 in this commission report? No. Not one word. Not one word was mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report of Building 7 collapsing. Nobody even knew that it happened. I didn't know that happened until a few years ago, but nobody knew that it happened.
Yeah. And that was the number one thing that, when this all became a conspiracy, it was pretty early on. People have been talking about how 9/11 was an inside job for a very long time, but there was a lot of people that just weren't paying attention because it was branded as a conspiracy theory. Therefore, as we know, it's off limits unless you want to be considered a crazy person and ostracized in public, because that's how they get you, right? If you feel like
the CIA invented the term conspiracy theorist, and it's because meant to be one of those trigger words.
You want to fit in as a human.
Right.
You don't want to feel like you're outside of your tribe. It's built inside of you to be part of a community. And so certain people that don't have the ability to research or haven't done the research, they just dismiss it because they're like, for whatever reason, and I don't fault anybody because we've all been lied to. I think I've made that very clear on the podcast that I'm not making fun of anybody for not understanding this a long time ago. What I'm saying is please understand it now, because we have very clear evidence that is, and it's not just us saying it. We're not just on this podcast making stuff up for ratings. This is real stuff that has been proven, and we haven't even gotten into all of it. But I think for now, we've come to a place where we've covered enough information to where you hopefully understand that this was an inside job. It was our own government covering up some of their shady deals, some of their shady stuff, and covering up the loss of all of that money, right? There's a lot of things that were accomplished in that one day. And some will speculate that this whole 9/11 thing was predicted for a very long time within all of our predictive programming.
And I think that it had all, we have the motive of all this money going missing. We have the motive of destroying records for all of this stuff. I mean, there's a lot of motive to destroy that part of the Pentagon and this building 7 specifically. Mm-hmm. So the narrative, so then I look at so we look at the Pentagon and we look at the New York City. So the Shanksville, Pennsylvania crash that happened. That one, it bothered me from the beginning because it didn't make any sense. Like, of course we don't know where its destination was, but let's do a thought experiment and say, what if it didn't have a destination? What if the destination was some random field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania? But the narrative that came out of that flight was these passengers stood up for their country. They stood up for their other passengers and they fought back and they crashed this plane into the ground so that they could minimize the loss of life. What a tale of heroism, right? So what is that program into the minds of the American people is, in my opinion, it sears into their mind that you should be willing to die for your country. Yes. You should be willing to die for your fellow passengers. You should be. So so then in that sense, people all of a sudden have this sense of country. They have this sense of pride. They have this sense of patriotism that they want to go fight for their country. Little do they know, because at that time we didn't know for sure. We were going to go to war. And people were going to literally fight for their country. So I feel like that crash was almost more like of a symbolic, the people, because then of course which I don't think we should get into, and I really don't. I did listen to a lot of them, but the phone calls that people from that flight somehow were able to make to their families. These phone calls are like, some of them are weird, but they're so sad. They're so devastating. These people are calling their families and saying, I'm on a hijacked plane and we're going to take this plane down. Like, those phone calls were so, I don't know, they really got to me. So I don't think we're going to put them on the episode. If you want to listen to them, you can find them online. But some of them were just really strange.
Enough trauma for each and every one of us that we don't want to re-traumatize people to the point of this, especially when it comes to their families and phone calls and stuff like that. So that's why.
And we don't really know what happened at the end of the day. We don't know what happened to these people. Mm-hmm. Was there a plane in Shanksville, Pennsylvania? I don't think so. I think it was another cruise missile, personally. Yeah. But there was a flight, and there was 40 people on that manifest that were supposed to be on that plane. Where did those people go?
Yeah.
Like, do you think that it could be okay? Because we've all heard, what was it? What do they call it? Oh my gosh, I'm like totally drawing a blank. The rocket that didn't make it out, and those people all supposedly, exploded and blah blah blah. The Challenger. So then they end up 20 years later, they find these people that look exactly like these astronauts that supposedly died in this Challenger crash. Okay, so what do you think about the fact that maybe these people that were on that plane, those people got taken off, or that plane got rerouted to wherever its final destination was? They take these people and say, you're if you ever want to see your family again, if you ever want to talk to your family again, blah, 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 they force them to make these phone calls. And this is your script, I guess. This is what you're supposed to say. those people are so the emotion that you hear in these people's voices is legitimately still there because they think that they're going to die because they have been hijacked. They just have not been crashed into the ground. So what do you think happened to those people? Did they get relocated? They get put in witness protection and
there's lots of speculation. It's really hard to say because I'm with you. I don't think there was actually a plane. It doesn't make any sense. But at the same time, we know from what we've learned over the years, especially these last 3 years, that they can use actors, and they do all the time, to
crisis actors.
Be these crisis actors, these stand-ins. And these people are very good at acting, just like every celebrity that's very good at acting, that they don't eat children. Excuse me. So if you have these actors that are able to make it seem like they're really in peril, they could do that for a movie. They do it all the time. They make it very believable for movies all the time.
We were just talking about how much Rick cries during movies, and Robert, actually.
Big crier.
Big criers in movies. I mean, actors can do a lot to your mind, but so I think these phone calls are real, but I don't think that the what happened to these people is real, or were they just names that they put on a manifest and that there was no people attached to them? I don't know.
My question is how, if the plane is being hijacked, there's that much time for them to make all of these phone calls and then we're going to go take over the plane. Like it just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. And not to mention, remember back, people didn't have cell phones in their pocket. These were phone calls that were made from the back of the seat somehow, that the planes had
never worked.
No,
I tried to use those phones.
And the planes, the pilots have their hijacked pilots have complete control of this plane. They're going to leave on the ability for the passengers to call the ground when it's just a flip of a switch to turn off the phone system. They turned everything else off.
Yep.
Right. So I don't know. It's so weird. This one really gets me.
Well, that's the point, right? It's supposed to get you. It's supposed to tug at your heartstrings to make you feel the feeling that you're feeling right now, the sadness and the hurt and all of that stuff. And I'm not saying that they don't exist. Those people don't exist. I don't personally think they existed, but I'm not going to say that for everybody. I think that they were crisis actors. However, if they were real people or not, everything that we've talked about up until this point points to the fact that it was a well-arranged, organized, predetermined outcome. And whether they forced people into saying something and then just got rid of them, actually killed them after they made their phone calls and just buried their bodies in the desert somewhere, or what, we don't know. But the fact is, the desired effect of it was the trauma, the manipulation of the mind.
And it was the trauma bonding. It was, the day after, on 9/12, the day after all this stuff happened, the United States was as united as I've ever seen it.
Yeah.
Everybody was like, oh, yes, let's do this. Let's, we're proud to be an American, all of this stuff. Like, we're going to fight back. We're not going to let you get away with this, blah, 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 blah. And then here we go. And this is where it turns into a false flag, is that shifting of blame. Instead of blaming the people that actually did it, which would be our own government, working alongside, Israel and some of these other places, instead of us blaming them, we're blaming all of these Middle Eastern countries. So we'll go over and take out a bunch of people that, shockingly, the Israelis want us to take out because they want that land.
Yep.
So it's a mutually beneficial arrangement, which I think the more, if you guys don't know by now, the more you've listened to us, the more you realize that the United States government, the corporation of the United States, they don't get involved in anything unless it's a mutually beneficial arrangement. That's how this world goes around.
Yep. It's all connected. And I think we've painted a lot of pictures for you, a lot of rabbit holes for you to go down. Now that you've been given this head start, maybe watch those documentaries, dig deep into this stuff. You can find it. If you're not finding stuff, ask us
or
on
get
the
on
Telegram.
the Fringy chat, or get on Instagram. We can send you, a lot of links where to look, because a lot of the stuff, if you type into Google, what happened on 9/11, you're going to get that official narrative that we already talked about. That's going to be by and large what you find on there, because this is like the number one scrubbed thing on the internet is the 9/11 conspiracy. They have people that their full-time jobs, lots of people, their full-time job is to find this information and take it down.
Yep. Same with COVID, same with all that. This is their job, the fact checkers. So with that, guys, we're going to take this one down. We know that we have basically just fire hose giving you a bunch of information, but hopefully we painted the picture well enough to where you could say definitively in your mind something's screwy. You may not know all of the pieces, you may not understand all of it, but something is weird about 9/11, and it's something that we are just hoping that you would search your own heart, listen to the Holy Spirit within inside of you. Hopefully you guys can put aside all of the cognitive dissonance and all of that stuff and just use your God-given logic. Allow the Holy Spirit to teach you in all of those ways, because guys, Israel is coming for you. It is what it is. And we need you to be paying attention, because there is a lot riding on it, because there is a choice that is always going to have to be made in the end. We know that. We've read the end of the book. There is a choice. Are you believing in Jesus and his gift of salvation, or are you going to continue to live in your religion and the things that you believe to be true based on what you were told by a human being? We don't live for human beings and their words. We live for God. We live for his word. He is our king. We are one nation under God. That is the way that it was set up, is to follow after God. And that is not the way that we are following now. We need to get back to our roots as Americans and stand up for what is right and speak truth as our King Jesus asked us to. So with that, we're going to be getting out of here. We hope you guys enjoyed this beginning of our False Flag series. We're going to continue on with more. Next time, we are going to be talking about the Vegas shooting, which is also a very big topic. And so stay tuned. That'll be coming up next. Also stay tuned for our other episodes. They're going to be a lot
next Saturday,
of good ones.
11 a.m. Eastern Time.
11.
We'll put it out on our Fringy chat and on our Instagram, the link to get you there. But in between now and then, if you have any questions, things you've wanted to ask your pastor, things you've wanted to ask your church, things that don't make sense, maybe things that you don't want to get judged for asking, but people, might shun you for asking, fire away. Send them this way. Yeah. Send them to us on Instagram, email, Telegram, whatever.
We don't care.
Send us your questions, and we're going to make a list of them, and we're going to give it to these 4 heavy hitters over here that are going to have a round table, a meeting of the minds.
Meeting of the minds. Us 4 and the Holy Spirit, our powers combined.
There you go.
So with that, we're going to get out of here. We love each and every one of you, and we're so thankful that you take the time to listen to us rambling on about these things. We hope that you're getting something out of it. We hope your life is changing in every way, getting closer and closer to Jesus as he comes nearer to you. And with that, we're going to get out of here. Thank you again. In Jesus' name, we pray. Hallelujah.
Oh, did we just transition into drama team Rick?
Oh my gosh.